Violence in the Valley. Today we are talking about the Phoenix area and why it is important to creation. Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host, Rich Gear here. And I'm here in Okemos. And Doug, you're in Grand Rapids. This is kind of a new experiment for us, but it seems to be okay, you know?
Yeah, well,
What's your background there, Doug?
I'm looking like I'm at Papago Park in Phoenix, and you are at Boyce Thompson State Park in the Phoenix near Superior, Arizona. So, we are pretending that we are part of the whole valley of Phoenix, and I have a chapter in my book, Revolution Against Evolution, and I also have a chapter in my book, Don't Let Your Geology Mess Up Your Theology.
I was going to say, that's your newest publication. It's been out for a little while yet. And it's chapter 21 of your book, actually. And we're going to talk about a few things, aren't we? A few areas that are talked about in this book. And it's pretty good because we have the South Mountains you want to talk about, and Papago Park, which is where I'm at, right?
That's where I'm at, and you're in.
That's where you're at, okay. Then there's Camelback Mountains, a mountain, and then Superstition Mountains, which I'm familiar with that because that's the Dutchman mine. That's that real famous area where the Lost Dutchman mine was at. And then Boyce Thompson Arboretum. So are we going to get to all those today?
We're going to try, okay.
Okay, let's go for it.
We'll start with the South Mountain, which is interesting from a creation standpoint. We visited that with David Oberfeller, who was part of the Arizona Oregon Science Association out in Phoenix area. And they have several chapters in Arizona, and it's because the geology in Arizona is really quite unusual. And I find it interesting that that entire area of South Arizona is unusual in that it's a flat desert, except for all these little mountains that pop up like islands in this flatness.
Yeah, you were kind of talking about like they were like almost like icebergs in the middle of a sea, only you talk about dirt, like it's a flat area and these peaks that come up and the top part of their peaks come up and show, yeah.
I find that actually fairly strange, although I think that we as creationists have an explanation for that, which, of course, the evolutionists would say, well, this happened over millions of years, and so they would expect that you would have things like this, but but it doesn't preclude or disprove our particular interpretation of this information.
I think, Doug, that's an important thing that we've talked about this a number of times, but I think it's always good to refresh people's memories, include mine. But we all have the same evidence, and we have to analyze it from the present. This doesn't make forensic type science to try to get to the past irrelevant or wrong, but it's basically what your starting point is. Oftentimes depends on what you're going to say or how you're going to interpret the what you're saying in the present. The point of it is that we have the same mountains, the same strata, the same fossils. All of it's in the present, and you have to interpret it from the past. The evolutionists always interpret things through millions of years, a million years or millions of years lenses, because they need this time supposedly to allow for evolutionary processes to happen. And that's, to me, the whole ball game is about length of time, because no one has ever seen evolution happen. Okay, and so that's the big deal about it. And they interpret everything through that lens. A creationist, on the other hand, we believe we have an eyewitness to what happened and how it was done. It doesn't explain all the processes. I think this is the thing. I think the Lord is very excited when we get to some of the possible solutions or answers to what happened and how they happened. I think the old scripture where it talks about it's the glory of God to conceal a matter and the glory of kings to ferret it out. And people who are believers in the Bible, the scripture and the creator and Jesus himself, we submit to that. We love to discover and explore his creation. And I think these things out here, we see all of this wonderful, we call it eye candy. It's beautiful stuff. But it's amazing that, when you look at this, it's such a glorious Grand Canyons and the stuff we're exploring tonight. But I love that John Morris talked about Grand Canyon, for instance, a monument to catastrophe. In our modern lens, it's a beautiful scenic thing to see and explore. National parks and all these things are wonderful. But there was a terrible thing that happened back in the day. And I think that the flood geology explains a lot more and better the evidence we see in the present before us. What do you think?
I think it's pretty interesting to take a look at a place like South Mountain, which is, if you go out, you take the interstate downtown Phoenix, and there's Center Avenue, which if you go south on Center Avenue, it takes you straight into South Mountain, and then there's an entrance into this park. And then you hit this mountain area and you start ascending up into this mountain with the switchbacks. And you come to a place where it's sort of like a saddle in the mountain. You can see both sides of the mountain. And on one side, you can look over and see Awataki, which is a little town on the other side of the mountain. Then the other side, you can see downtown Phoenix. Now, it's at this very particular spot where you have a change in the mountain composition. The top layer is Precambrian, and the bottom layer is Tertiary. Now, if you know anything about the geologic column, that's exactly reverse of what you would expect. And at that saddle where those two different things meet, one of the older rocks supposedly is on top, is moved over on top of the younger rock. And it looks like you had a real collision there of the two entirely different strata sequences.
But of course, I'm sorry, Doug, even on top of that, where's all the other strata that's in between Precambrian and Tertiary? Even though it's upside down, has it been eroded away supposedly, or did it not exist, or what? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Precambrian is like the oldest strata, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, and Tertiary is like recent, basically. Yeah.
And so the question is, how do you explain this from an evolutionary point of view? And you really can't. It's a real dilemma to try to explain this. I find it, and I don't see this even talked about very much, even in creation literature, that this particular upheaval exists. And this is why I call this show Violence in the Valley, because the whole valley is volcanic. It looks like the whole flat layers of sediment was laid down in amongst these mountains that were popped up. And the probably mountains existed before. Then he had all this sediment erosion come into this area after the volcanic mountains rose up. Now, if you take a look at Papago Park, these are quartzite buttes that popped up that are right there in the middle of the city, and so they're quite scenic. I have one right behind me that's called Hole in the Rock. There's actually two different arches in this area here, and the one that I have right behind me is when you're approaching from behind the hole in the rock. You can see this arch is right above you. And then there's another arch that overlooks the valley, and so it's kind of a neat little spot. And they have the park right below you, and they have some artificial ponds that are pretty beautiful when they contrast against the stark sand quartzite rocks that are behind it.
Yeah, Doug, is that hole in the rock? What kind of rock is that composed? Is it sandstone or something else?
Quartzite.
Oh, it's quartzite. Okay.
That's what I understand that it is. It's a volcanic rock, but it's interesting that it seems to have eroded quite a bit. With all the different caves and the arch and the holes in it, and so you can actually walk all the way around this butte, and it's not that really big, but it's kind of interesting to take a look at that. Camelback Mountain, you can see from Papago Park, and it's really a mountain that looks quite a bit like a camel. It looks like the hump in the middle, and then another part of it looks like the head with the camel laying down. And
that's kind of like a dromedary, huh?
Yeah, those dromedary camel, and it's. I know my daughter and her daughter climbed it the last time they were out there, and so it's kind of a nice little spot, but it's made up of the same kind of volcanic stuff that Papago Park is. And so there's several mountains in that area that are a lot like that. But I found that South Mountain was quite unusual. You can see the intrusions in the rock at South Mountain, the volcanic dikes that come out, and you go out towards the end of that road that takes you out towards the end of it, and it stops at a lookout, and there's a spot, there's a trail that takes you up a little bit higher in the mountain, and you can see a place called the Chinese Wall, and it's it's an intrusion that is in the rock, and so apparently that may be where they get the Precambrian dates. Now Precambrian rock doesn't have any fossils on it, and so they also date it by that. The fact that it doesn't have any fossils, well, it has to be before life evolved, and so that's sort of begging the question in my mind. But that's something that you can see quite a bit in that area. Now, if you go out towards the east from Phoenix, you encounter a Superstition Mountain. You take Superstition Freeway in the US 60, and you can get off at the exit that says Idaho Street or Idaho Road, and go turn north on Idaho Street, and it takes you to the Apache Trail, and that takes you out eventually it turns to a dirt road, and in a couple of spots it's a 1-lane road, and it's kind of treacherous because it's overlooking a cliff. When I was out there with Larry Perry and John Iverson, we were on that 1-lane road, and here comes a truck with a trailer behind it.
Really? And what kind of a knucklehead would try to take that 1-lane road with a truck and you had what was on the back of a boat? You said, or what? Or a trailer?
We had a boat behind on a trailer behind it, and so here we had to back up and sort of get into the ditch so he could pass us precariously on the cliffside. And I
guess I'm trying to figure out why would a guy be towing a boat in the middle of a desert area?
Well, it's because there is a marina down there on the Saguaro Lake.
Is there really? Wow, okay.
Apache Lake, and there's several lakes that follow the Salt River into Phoenix. And it's actually the water supply for Phoenix. and then you follow all that the Salt River up to the Roosevelt Dam, which the Theodore Roosevelt Lake is a huge lake and that's really the water supply for most of Phoenix.
Okay.
And so, but the Apache Trail is wild and treacherous, and there's a little gold mining town there called Goldfield. Did you go with us there when we were out there?
Me, I'm not trying to remember. I actually went to the gold. I don't know. I'm going to say no because I think I did. Unless several years we might have, but I don't remember that. But I know I've read about. Wait a minute, did I go to that one time? It doesn't matter. But something about that seems right because I remember. Is this the area? Is it? No, we're not near. Are we in the area where the Lost Dutchman mine is supposedly? In
yes, exactly.
I think yes, I was there, and we kind of walked around a little bit. Now it's it's kind of a touristy, not really tourist track, but it's quite quite desolate.
Have to go down the gold mine.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I enjoyed that quite a bit. But and the story of the Lost Dutchman mine is a little bit of a sidebar that we won't get into. But
No.
there is a museum that talks all about that.
You can Google it. It's all over the place. You know, there's all kind. It's fun. There's legends and stories about it. It's fun to look at it, and at the end of it, you're going to go, I wonder if that's true. Could it be true? And you believe it or you don't believe it. So that's the way it is.
Right. You know. You have a sketchy record of that whole event and of Jacob Waltz finding all this gold and then he dies, and the people just wonder what happened to it, where the mine was, where did he get all this gold, and so something like this is a little bit like forensic science, and evolution falls into the category of forensic science, where you just have to understand that all you have is the evidence that you have in front of you, and you can only make up stories of how that evidence got there.
Absolutely.
And, if you have eyewitnesses that talk about it, who were there when it happened, well, that's a different story, and that's the Bible explanation. The Bible talks about real people and real events that took place in the past. But if you don't know anything about what the Bible says, and you just look at the evidence that you dig up in the dirt and from archaeology, and what you have is a whole lot less valid evidence from only from what you interpret. If you go to Boyce Thompson State Park, which is the Arboretum. I presume you were with us when we did some of the video work there, right?
Yes, and I like that. Yeah, this is the one. I'm trying to think what was because where's the one that David Overpriller is at? Which one is that? Where's he at?
That's the Boyce Thompson Arboretum.
That's what I thought. Okay, because he's got a tour of like it's got the local flora, but it's also got Bible. Like plants of the Bible. It's got a kind of a nice tour about that,
Yeah, he did the Plants of the Bible tour for many years. He's been ailing. He was last time we were out there. He wasn't able to do the tour anymore. So
okay. Oh, okay.
But anyway, he would go through the arboretum and talk about the different plants that he encountered and how they fit in the Bible and what the interpretations of it. I remember he talked about that there were Zacchaeus and the sycamore tree. Well, the one that they have in the Arboretum is a different kind of sycamore tree than the one that's mentioned in the Bible, and they're spelled differently. there's SYCAMORE, and then there's SYCOMORE. And so there's two different kinds of plants called sycamore trees, and it's just kind of interesting that he mentioned that in the plants of the Bible. And
yeah, and that's an interesting thing because how names change or remain similar for these are two entirely different trees, aren't they, Doug?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, and that gives you I always think in terms of like the gopher tree, gopher wood. What the heck is that? It's only mentioned once in the Bible, and sometimes people interpret it as cypress, but there's we have no idea what kind of a tree it was. And of course, pre-flood, there could be different kinds of trees, and after post-flood, speciation happens, and who knows? But it is fun that you can get to some of them. It's not like it's a lost cause for all of them, and I think that's where David's tour was kind of neat to see some of that stuff, And some things remain, like olive trees are pretty much what they are. Olive trees are, they're. But what I learned about the olive trees, you don't want to eat an olive tree right off the tree. They do not taste good.
I tried it.
Did you try it?
I tried the olive. It was pretty bitter.
It's nasty. Yeah, it's not good at all. But yeah, give me my green olives with pimentos in it, and you can have the black olives. And although I like what's the other one? The Kalamata or I can't remember. It's kind of. It tastes like a green olive to me, but it kind of looks a little bit like a black olive. It's a little more elongated. But that's pretty tasty. That's pretty good. But I like olives, but a lot of people, some people love them, don't. But the oil out, of course, that's used in the biblical text in a lot of ways, symbolically as well as literally. So it's kind of
one thing that's interesting about the olive tree is that you really can't kill them.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the Romans cut down the olive trees at the Garden of Gethsemane, and they regrew back up. And so from the stump. And so in order to get rid of an olive tree, you have to actually get rid of the entire root.
The root system, yeah.
And so it's quite a prolific tree, and it stands to reason also that it would have been one of the first things to pop up after the flood.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The dove carrying the olive branch back to the ark. And so that was something I learned from David Oberfeller about the plants in the Bible. He talked about frankincense, myrrh, and rue, and cumin, and a lot of these other plants, hyssop. And he showed us those particular plants in that.
Yeah.
But again, that whole area at Boyce Thompson State Park shows the upheaval that took place in southern Arizona during that time. And so that really shows us that all that area shows volcanic upheaval.
But all of these five areas, is it 5 areas? Whatever these areas. What is it like the total area this encompasses? Is it really the state? Is it state of Arizona? We started like in Phoenix, but how far around are we talking about? And are there several different events, like for dealing from a flood model, that these areas, like you have volcanism, you have is it all, because you talk about the violence, and it's a lot of upheaval and stuff like that. And so how big of an area are we talking about?
You have the Estrella Mountains to the west. You have the White Mountains to the west. You have the McDowell Mountains to the east of Phoenix, the Red Mountain in the area, and then Superstition Mountains way to the east. And then you have, you go down to the south, you have Picacho Peak halfway to Tucson. And so really you're talking about the entire southern part of Arizona.
Well, it's big, big area. Because I'm thinking that you've got, all of this is taking place during would you say the beginning parts of the flood or middle part where you still got a lot of violent upheaval? You're not settling off now. You're basically there are upthrust and subduction zones, and there are all kinds of stuff happening. Volcanism, especially, is big during this particular time. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a big part where things are happening and separating, causing things inland like this, because this is kind of, Arizona is somewhat inland, you know what I'm saying? And stuff is happening.
Well, Jim Clark is sort of the geologist that is part of the Arizona Origin Science Association. He talked about that this area is like the Yellowstone caldera. So it's that huge of a deal.
That's huge.
And so even if you go south to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which I did that with Dan Jansen last time I was out there, you have all these pop-up mountains in this sea of flat desert.
Yes.
And so it's just a very unusual environment to me to explain because it's such a vast area. It shows vast cataclysm, not local stuff that happens just maybe one sand grain at a time, like we talked about, where it's just eroding over.
Also, a lot of these things would be interpreted by uniformitarian geologists as happening at different times. Wouldn't you think that?
Right.
To me, it's much more explainable happening in one major cataclysmic event. You know what I'm saying? It just seems to be much more amenable to what we're actually seeing. So, well, Doug, with the last couple of minutes we've got left, how do you want to close this out?
Well, I think that when you go to Phoenix, you don't realize the vast amount of geologic activity that took place in this area. And you've got this big city that about 3 million people in the metropolitan area, and you don't really consider it as being a hotbed for geological investigation, especially from a creationist standpoint.
Yeah.
But there's all this vast area that shows it's going that happened. And if you condense it down to the creation explanation, where the global flood took place and you had a volcanic event in this area causing all this upheaval, it makes sense from a catastrophic plate tectonics point of view.
Yes.
And so look that up, check it out, and see if that makes sense from an interpretation. Don't let your geology mess up your theology.
Yep.
And I hope that you would enjoy that. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.